Good evening, I'm Amy Challis, the Scottish Raptor Monitoring Coordinator. I'm hosted with BTO Scotland and have been working for the scheme since 2014. I was delighted when Mark invited me to speak on the work of the scheme as part of marking RBBP's 50th anniversary celebrations. In my presentation this evening, I want to give you a brief introduction to the scheme, recognise the importance of RBBP to the work of the scheme, and share with you the raptor trends that we were able to publish in November to coincide with the scheme's own 20th anniversary celebrations. So, firstly, who are we? The scheme is now a partnership of these 8 organisations, including non-governmental organisations, volunteer-led organisations, and statutory agencies, and I'm sure these logos will be familiar to most of you. All the partner organisations that comprise the scheme are either actively involved in monitoring raptors or in collecting and/or publishing survey information about raptors. The scheme monitors all the breeding raptor species native to Scotland. So we've got 9 species of hawks, buzzards, eagles, kites and harriers, 4 species of falcon, osprey, which is in a family all of its own, and the largely nocturnal raptors, the 5 species of owl. You might also be surprised to hear that we monitor raven as part of the scheme. While not strictly a raptor, the scheme have adopted raven as an honorary raptor species, as it's ecologically similar to some raptors, being a top predator, scavenger, and a long-lived species. Raptor monitoring has been going on in Scotland for many decades, long before the scheme came into existence in 2002. The first Scottish Raptor Study Group batches came into being in the 1980s when groups of committed volunteer raptor surveyors formed regional groups to coordinate fieldwork for national surveys of golden eagle and peregrine falcon. These groups provided a forum for exchange of information on survey techniques and began to collect and collate valuable long-term data sets for raptors. The vast majority of people currently monitoring raptors and contributing data to the scheme are volunteers and are members of the Scottish Raptor Study Group. There are 12 separate branches across Scotland, all coming under the Scottish Raptor Study Group umbrella. About 360 Scottish Raptor Study Group members are actively involved in monitoring raptors all across Scotland. Many individuals have been operating studies of raptors in particular areas for many years, long before the scheme was established. And these long-term studies are really important, as you'll see shortly. The partnership between SRMS and RBBP is a strong and important one, as both organisations provide the facts and robust information about birds of prey in Scotland. RBBP have been involved with the scheme since the outset. This picture shows representatives of the 7 original partners who met in Perthshire to sign the formal agreement to launch the scheme back in 2002. You'll see here some probably familiar faces from the panel. We've got Malcolm Ogilvie, who originally represented RBBP, but also fellow members David Stroud, who represented JNCC on the SRMS steering group up to his retirement from JNCC, and also Mark Collin, who originally represented SOC on the Scottish Raptor Monitoring Scheme, but who represented RBBP on the scheme steering group between 2006 and 2020. SRMS data are the principal source of breeding records used by RBBP in its annual report, and you can see the list of relevant species here. In turn, RBBP share with the scheme Schedule 1 raptor records that have reached them so that they can be taken account of in the SRMS annual reporting figures. Probably of even greater value to the scheme is the wealth of experience that RBBP representatives bring to the SRMS steering group table to contribute to progressing and developing the work of the scheme. One of the key objectives of the scheme is to provide robust information on Scottish raptor populations to determine trends in number, range, survival and productivity, and to understand the causes of population change. Survival is much harder to monitor as it involves much more intensive work, and so far the scheme has concentrated on producing trends in breeding numbers and productivity. In November, we were delighted to be able to publish trends for many SRMS species, which is a culmination of the efforts of over 800 data contributors. I thought I'd spend a bit of time taking you through this work this evening. I should at this point give particular mention to my colleague Mark Wilson at BTO, who led on this trends analysis, and the trends analysis covers the period from 2009 to 2018. So what are trends for? The trends can actually be very useful. The BTO's flagship monitoring scheme, the Breeding Bird Survey, is mainly aimed at delivering population trends which are communicated via a wide range of reports, newsletters, scientific papers and popular articles. Annual trends allow us to take the pulse of bird populations, alerting us to problems as they arise. Even when these are problems we already know about, trends can help us communicate these to agencies, government and the wider public, putting solid evidence behind our understanding. They can also have a range of other uses, including helping us to understand drivers of population changes and what might be done to manage these to conserve raptors more effectively. So here are just a few examples of BBS trends. In the top left, you can see the BBS trend for curlew in Scotland. BBS trends have played a really crucial part in detecting and demonstrating the scale of breeding weight declines in recent decades. The remaining pictures here are all examples of raptor trends. So for barn owl, it's the only UK level trend BBS is available. For some of the commoner species of raptors, such as buzzard and raven shown here, there are Scottish BBS trends, but these are not broken down by regions. It's important to recognise that BBS has several limitations when it comes to monitoring and producing trends for raptors. So BBS just looks at trends in numbers, but it can't be used to produce trends in any of the measures of productivity. Specific raptor monitoring approaches, however, are designed to separate breeding numbers and metrics for productivity. Secondly, the methods of BBS are not well suited to surveying raptors. The encounter rates for raptors are much lower on transects, which gives lower statistical power for detecting trends. The rarer raptor species are also encountered far too infrequently in BBS surveys to be able to produce trends for them. And finally, it's generally difficult to separate breeding adults from non-breeding juveniles, so BBS includes them both, while for the SRMS we get a good handle on breeding adults, but not the non-breeding ones. So, in this latest analysis, we aim to produce trends for breeding numbers, that's the number of breeding pairs, and also trends for a range of productivity parameters, as you can see here. So these included breeding success, clutch size, brood size, and also the number of fledglings. Overall, the scheme ambition is to produce national, that's Scottish trends that are fully representative of the Scottish populations of each species, and to then produce regional scale trends. For the regional trends, we broke Scotland down into two different ways, as depicted here. So on the left, we've got SRMS regions, which effectively equate to the SRSG branch regions. And on the right, we have natural heritage zones, which break Scotland down into different biogeographic areas. And these are largely used by the statutory bodies such as NatureScot. To be able to produce robust trends, you do need to consider carefully which data are suitable for trends analysis. And in order to produce a trend, we need to have a big enough sample size that changes are likely to be picked up. We also need to be confident that the information we're using is representative of the areas we're making trends for. And for trends in numbers in particular, we need to have a good understanding of coverage in the areas surveyed. So these maps illustrate the distribution of data coming into BBS and SRMS in recent years. The spread of data achieved by both is pretty impressive, but sampling effort is clearly uneven in both surveys, concentrated in certain areas. However, the fact that BBS squares are assigned randomly from different regions and that all squares receive comparable survey effort makes it relatively straightforward to turn BBS data into trends. This is what BBS was designed to do, but SRMS is very different. Collecting data on raptors is typically a much more intensive activity, and the monitoring effort that SRMS draws on comes from a wide variety of different studies that were set up to do a variety of worthwhile things, but were mostly not designed from first principles to yield trends. So we had a two-step process for identifying areas that could be used for trends. Firstly, we looked at the records themselves to identify areas where the spacing of the home ranges suggested coverage within an area was high, and this was informed by knowledge of distances between nesting ranges of each species from the literature. And we then had a period of consultation with data contributors to sense check the trends we produced and omitted any that were deemed non-rigorous. Of the 20 species which the scheme regularly reports on annually, we've been able to produce trends for 14. And here you can see the 6 SRMS species that we've not been able to produce any trends for. These trends tend to be very rare breeders and or difficult to monitor species that are recorded too infrequently or inconsistently by SRMS contributors to allow production of trends currently. In the next few slides, I'm going to hone in on some of the trends we have been able to produce for just 2 species as examples of what we've been able to produce. I'm going to start with white-tailed eagle. White-tailed eagle are one of 2 reintroduced species that we have here in Scotland. So a quick history on them for you. Unfortunately, they went extinct in 1917. However, since the mid-1970s, there's been a programme to reintroduce them. Firstly on Rum between 1975 and 1985, in Wester Ross in the 1990s, and more recently to the east coast of Scotland. White-tailed eagle is the only species for which we've been able to produce national trend in numbers. As you might hope for with a reintroduced population, the number of breeding pairs has increased linearly through time by 5.4% a year. Up until the last few years of the trend period, this species was monitored quite comprehensively, so this is the only species for which we drew on all the records that we held in our database for trends in breeding numbers, not just those that we'd identified as being in clusters. Here we can see the regional trends that we've been able to produce at an SRMS regional level. The increase in numbers of breeding pairs at a national level is reflected in the trend for Argyll, where there's been a 5.8% annual increase over the trend period. The 3 other regions for which trends were possible did not detect a significant change. Perhaps these other regions have reached capacity with breeding pairs, or perhaps there's something else going on linked to the smaller sample sizes. Breeding success of white-tailed eagle has not changed significantly in any of the 3 regions for which trends could be produced, so that's Argyll, Highland and Lewis and Harris. It is going to be trickier to monitor this species in the future. We will need a means of picking up the new pairs that are settling away from the core areas of distribution. The species we'll take a quick look at next is hen harrier. This map shows the clusters of home ranges from which sufficient data were reported to attempt to derive trends in breeding numbers from hen harrier over the trends period. Despite being a species that is well monitored and receives a lot of attention from existing scheme contributors, a national trend has simply not been possible with SRMS data. You can see, for example, that Caithness and East Sutherland hen harrier populations are obvious gaps. We have, however, been able to produce trends in breeding numbers and productivity for some regions. Where significant trends have been detected, they are negative rather than positive. So we can see in these plots significant decreases in both Highland and South Strathclyde. This slide is just giving you an overview of the trends that we've been able to produce for the number of breeding pairs for different species region combinations, which you can study at your own leisure in our report. So figures in brackets indicate the national changes, with significant increases highlighted in green, significant decreases highlighted in blue, and non-significant changes highlighted in grey. Dashes indicate where the species occurs, but no trend is available. NL indicates non-linear trends, and ABS indicates where the species is not known to breed. It's also important to note that for many of our trends we have attached caveats to them, which should be borne in mind when considering the trends. So, for example, we've highlighted when the trend has been based on a particularly small sample size. This slide alone hints that there's still a lot of work to do if the scheme's to achieve being able to produce national trends for any SRMS species, and the dashes in this table hint at where the scope to work with existing and new data contributors alike to make it more likely that we'll be able to produce regional and national trends in the future. To see all the detail of this work, please visit the scheme website. Here you can access an electronic copy of our Summary Trends report and also a technical report summarising the detailed methods used in the analysis. You can also access separate documents explaining the trends in numbers of breeding pairs and each of the productivity measures across the range of different species and regions. Perhaps best of all, you can explore trends interactively on an app, and you're able to toggle between SRMS regions, national heritage zones, and then select the species parameter and up to 2 regions to compare the trends for. Congratulations RBBP on your 50th anniversary. Thanks for your involvement in the scheme over the last 2 decades, and I look forward to continue to working with you in the future. Thank you.